All right, I guess I got 2 minutes past. We can kick off with introductions. All right, my name is Om Patel. I'm an enterprise agile coach with Clearly Agile.
That's it.
That's it. That's it. We're going to talk about metrics here today.
All right. My name's Fred Mastropasqua. I'm a certified Scrum trainer. I've been in IT for about 30 years and been around Agile and Scrum for about 13, 14 years. And I'll hand it back to Om to kind of kick us off.
All right, folks. So if you're here, I'm assuming you're interested in Agile metrics, right? We're going to talk about what to measure, why you should measure, and how you should measure it. So with that, let me share my screen and we can walk us through some of the metrics. This presentation will be available to you as a recording, as well as the metrics slide will be available to you. Give me a second here to find what I am sharing. Hopefully now you are seeing my screen. Give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen. Awesome. All right. So 40 plus software teams, so 40 plus metrics for measuring software teams. This is not a comprehensive list. We're not saying you should be doing all of this. What we are saying is if you're interested in one of these headings, you should be doing 1 or 2 of these at the minimum. And then as you progress forward, you can add some more under each of these headings. So with that, let me kick off with the first one, and we're going to kind of just do a tag team. People/team, human elements, right? Projects are great until you add humans. So let's talk about how you can measure some of these. So this set of metrics shows you what's going on that prevents the team from maintaining a sustainable pace, right? So some of these metrics you may have heard of, some you may not have heard of. If you have any questions, by the way, throughout this session, please put them in the questions section. We'll handle those later. So just go to the Q&A area and enter your questions there. You should definitely be looking at team health and well-being. And one of the things that you can look for here is how happy is your team? How do you measure that, right? There are many different ways of measuring that. For instance, you could do what's known as a Nico calendar. So every day of the sprint, people go into a calendar, and you do this online as well, and they use an image, right? A smiley or a frowny face or a straight face. Right? So that if you did that for a sprint, you can now see maybe there's a time during the sprint when more people were not happy versus those that were happy. What happened during that time? And a retrospective would be a perfect place to kind of deep dive into that and see what can smooth things out for subsequent sprints.
It's interesting you mentioned the calendar because now where everyone's remote. We used to do this, as we get older now. It's back in my day when we used to work in the office together, right? But we used to do the same thing. We'd have a box and you'd put in exactly what you said, a coin that represents you're happy, you're sad or mad, and just you're neutral. So yeah, you have to now convert a lot of these things to online. But like Om said, it allows you to kind of look consistently, there's a unhappy time here among our sprints and try to figure out why that's the case.
Yeah, on one of my teams, it just so happens that on a Friday, people weren't happy. So usually people should be happy on a Friday and they're not, right? What happened there? So looking at that through the retrospective, it turned out that the team was not looking forward to the Fridays because that's when they were deploying code on Friday evenings. And they look forward to basically pajama parties, having to babysit releases into production. And that as a team, they decided with leadership to not do that on a Friday, that on a Wednesday instead. So it can be revealing. It may seem like it's just a very basic thing to do, having people draw faces on a calendar, but it can reveal quite a bit. All right, team/manager/organizational eNPS. What's the eNPS here, Fred? What's the E signify? Net Promoter Score.
So for the NPS score is really going to be around, I always look at NPS score as customer score, right? So
Mhm.
normally you're looking outward for your customers. I mean, you could do this internally as well. I don't know if you've ever done this internally, but NPS score typically is on the product side. So you'll see that there's a correlated one over on the last column for a net promoter score, right? So here we're looking at kind of enterprise wide, we're looking at internally, even voting on our team members or how they're being interpreted as far as kind of like an NPS score. I don't know if you've used that any differently.
I've used it externally as well with product, looking at promoters and detractors. I think the E in ENPS in that first column is really more the enterprise level. You could look at it that way, similarly as you would with your customers as well. All right, moving on, percentage of time without interruptions. So are you able to have a established cadence that you can work to and without having to, band-aid things, right? Firefighting, things like that. Trust between leadership and team. This gets tricky to measure because people don't necessarily want to be outgoing and tell people if they don't trust one another, but it is important to at least try to measure. I think the thing to remember is don't do a point in time measurement and say this is what it is. Do an average across n number of data points, and that might be more telling, right? Because on a given day, you never know how somebody's feeling. A learning log. This is an excellent technique. We use this. So the learning log allows you to put in not only good things that the team learned, but also things they learned that you shouldn't be doing, right? Or you should not be doing as much of. So this is an excellent idea, very simple to implement. This can be anything. It could be a wiki, for example, in your ALM tool, right? Jira, whatever you're using. So that is a simple implementation, but the thing about that is don't have that stood up and then forget about it, right? Periodically comb through it and say, let's actually reflect on what's in there. Overtime hours, self-explanatory here, really. Sometimes it's necessary. So if it's sporadic, if it's once in a while, okay. But if it's routine, you may have a different problem to solve there.
And I think we can just highlight our favorites in these as well. If we want to move on, like to release metrics, right? As we kind of go down there. Some of the ones that I like is the cost per release. You can figure out cost per sprint. You can figure out a cost per point. There is a way to calculate that as far as what's the total cost of our team, divide that by the number, salary wise, add up your team salary wise for a given year, divided by the number of sprints, and you can figure out a cost per sprint, which then can give you a cost per release. Like how often do you release? What's the cost associated to that? Which you can then tie to then what's the value that's been delivered. Time since last release, I like to also track. Sometimes you can't control this, like if you're releasing in a healthcare environment, hospital environment, you're forced to only release 1 to 2 times a year. Outside of that, though, maybe it's internal release versus a production release into production as well. So then you have NPS down here too, right? Now down here you have a release net promoter score. I've never used a release net promoter score though. Not something I find a lot of value in. I do find value in how often we release, how long does it take to release, because you want that to get as small as possible. On a really good agile engineering team, you can release in a matter of less than minutes, right? If you have it all automated through DevOps processes. And that's the goal. If it's painful for you to release, then you're not going to release as often. Versus if it's easy for you to release, then you can release a lot sooner and more often, and that cost per release can drop as well.
Yep, and that directly improves your success rate, the second bullet there.
Yes, yep.
Awesome. Yeah, so a lot of times Scrum teams are tracking bugs, but escape defects are very important because escaped defects are bugs that have now gone out into the wild, right? The customers are seeing these. So these are very, very important to track. Let's move on to the middle column there now, process and health metrics. So some of these will be familiar to most people: cycle time, CFDs, cumulative flow diagrams. Lead time is somewhat less useful because you can have items enter your backlog and you don't really have control over that, and they just sit there. But they shouldn't sit there too long, because a bit like, stuffing your fridge with fresh fruit and vegetables, after a while they will deteriorate. So backlog should not be too deep. But all of these cycle time, etc., all of these flow metrics only make sense if your team is fairly steady, right? If you have a lot of churn on your team, then these are not as meaningful. They're just numbers at that point. Flow efficiency, right? That is a very underrated metric. So instead of looking at just metrics like velocity, for instance, flow efficiency, if your flow efficiency is good, you don't have bottlenecks, then you're doing well. You're doing as well as you can be given the pipeline, right? So if you think about flow across a tube, the best flow you're going to get is when there's no blockage in the tube at all, and then it will constrict as you have blockages. But the constraint is on the lumen, the diameter of the pipe. So similarly with here, your team's capability, right? It's, let's say, at 100%. I'm not talking about time. I'm talking about the ability to deliver. And they should be up there. If they're not, then your flow efficiency is compromised. So look at that. And then time fever is one of my favorites as well. There's so many things that make sure that your time is not well spent. So identifying those, and with a view to elimination, right? Get rid of those things that don't make sense.
Yeah, and in a few minutes we'll go over some of the whys and some things to look out for when measuring. But something I want to point out here, especially because it always stands out to me, is these measurements are not things you can only do on a Scrum team. Right, these are just measurements in general you could apply to an agile-based team. Like a lot of the process health metrics, cycle times, cumulative flow, some of these things will help in a Kanban team, right, as well. So it's not about whether the team does Scrum or not. It's really about things we can measure overall on any team. But when we come with an agile mindset, there are things we want to keep in mind, which we'll cover here in a few minutes.
Yeah, another one of my favorites in that middle column at the top is the experimentation aspect of things, right? So people often come out of retrospectives, they identify 2 or 3 things to improve on, and then they just leave them there, right? You want to try and create experiments, come up with a hypothesis that if we do X, then we expect Y to happen, or a negative hypothesis that we expect Y will not happen going forward. And that way, if the experiment turns out to be a success, you can continue doing more of it. If it doesn't, then you can pivot and come up with a new experiment. So that is something that works really well if you have that kind of an approach, rather than, now we'll do this. Some team members may not agree, but if you treat it as an experiment, you could say, well, let's try it for a sprint or 2, and if it doesn't work, we'll change up, right? They're more akin to kind of following that. So I would say definitely give that some thought.
Yeah, and moving down to like technical code metrics, some of the ones that I like are automated test coverage, just knowing a percentage of how much of our code is covered by some type of automated test. It's hard to get to 100, but maybe we can get to 80, 90%. Build time is not something I only look at that if I look at build time and build breaks kind of together, in the sense of if our builds are taking longer and longer, we might want to address that possibly. And then build breaks, is that a process issue? If we're breaking our build, typically it means the developer maybe is not doing some level of testing locally, or merging that code before testing. And so they're breaking the builds because they're just pushing it out blindly. So I'm more just paying attention if it's happening, just to see if we need to, if it's happening consistently, then we might want to discuss it, or might want to discuss that. Code ownership is really important in that. I mean, on a true Scrum team, everyone should own everything, ideally, right? So I'm looking at that. Code complexity. A lot of these are really up to the developers. I wouldn't, as a Scrum master or as a product owner, push these to the team. It'd be more like, here are possible suggestions. What do you think? Right? What's something we may want to track? Now, if you're in a large organization, you might have an IT manager. Maybe you're set up with a type of matrix setup system where developers report into IT. And so they may want to be tracking some of these elements down here.
Yeah, one of my favorites at the bottom, ratio of fixing work versus feature work. So you work with the product folks can actually have a lot to do with this, right? They can say, well, we know we have a certain amount of tech debt that we have to fix, but figure out, does it need fixing now? Does it need fixing at all? What's the return in fixing that versus doing feature work in its stead, because there's an opportunity cost every time you refactor something.
Yeah.
Moving on to the last column, product development metrics. Some of these are kind of relatively new in the field. Like the NPS stuff has not been around that long. Customer value delivered. So everybody can have a different opinion on how to measure that. What is value delivered? How do you measure that? There is no actual prescription there, right? So you can create a scale for your own team or teams, and it doesn't matter what that scale is. Use it consistently, though. That's the key. So let's say you use a scale of 1 to 10, and then you can decide how much value is being delivered. The thing about that metric is you shouldn't be the one judging that value. It should be the customer judging the value. So if you can judge the value for that, it can be gained. Let's see what else. User analytics, right? DAU, MAU. DAU is what now? Daily something users, daily average users, and monthly average users, something like that.
People using your system, yeah. Is it going up? Is it going down? Right. Value stream mapping. I don't know if I want to say. I mean, there's a metrics in value stream mapping. How do you go from idea to production? What are all the steps in between? How long do those steps take? Net Promoter Score is a really one standard one everyone should be doing is NPS. You can poll your users every 90 days, have them rank it from a 1 through 10. Just Hertz does this. Every product I work on has an NPS score, and you're working towards, like 30 plus NPS score, something to look into. Something definitely every product owner should be looking and tracking.
Yeah,
Number of times. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Fred.
I was like, number of times a week you talk to an actual customer, right? This can be either measured at the product side and also can be measured on the support side. If you have a support team, it's like, how often do they have to, are they talking to a customer? And is it because of problems or is it because of requests? So sometimes often on the support side, we'll see who's the most active users. And then the opposite, we haven't talked to somebody in a really long time, right? So you can kind of track the negative effect, the negative side of that, you could say. We haven't talked to client X in a really, really long time. So either they're not using the product and we want to reach out possibly.
Yeah, and some of these dovetail into one another, right? So number of validated business level hypotheses developed. If somebody comes up with a description of a feature they believe the customer wants, but how do you know they want that? Have you validated that? So unless you've done that, it's just a guess, right?
Yeah. To summarize all this, like these are all things you could actually track. But my biggest thing I would say I want to convey to everybody is that there's a couple of things to keep in mind. Always be careful what you measure. You will get your team's behavior will adjust and change based on what you actually measure. And you will always be biased towards the data. Even if you try not to be, the data is always going to be, and it's going to be viewed in your bias, lens. So an example of you get what you measure is, let's say you measure, hey team, I'm going to measure how many tasks you get done in a sprint, time box of 2 weeks or less or whatever it is, right? That's what we're measuring, how many tasks you're going to get done. So now as a team member, you're going to change my behavior. I'm not going to take that big task I had, and I'm going to break into like 5 smaller tasks. There you go. I've met your measurement, right? Yeah, I've done nothing different and nothing new. Right, maybe you say, hey, we're going to measure how long you're in your seats. You have to be in your seat 40 hours a week. That's what we care about. Great. That means I'm going to sit in my seat and come Friday, I'm done a little bit early, but I can't leave. So I'm going to watch YouTube videos, TikTok, whatever. Right. The point here is I've met your measurement, but haven't really done anything different behavior wise. Right. So you want to be careful what you measure. What you should be measuring. Right? Do you have a working product at the end of a sprint? Let's say you're doing Scrum, right? Do you have a working product at the end of the sprint, right? What about customer satisfaction, right? That should be more important. That would drive the behavior. If you said to your team, I'm going to bonus you based on your percentage of how often you get a product done at the end of a sprint. And you let's say you were put money behind that, your team would then change their behavior, right? Over time, very quickly, to meet that measurement, if they know that's where they're going to be performance on, right, is having a working product. So with all these measurements, these should not be used as team bashing, oh, your cycle time's too high and your code churn is too high. It's more just data points to look at as a team as a whole to figure out where can we improve processes. They're not intended to be taken up to the management to say, look, this team is awful and we should, fire them all, in that sense. It's more about, do these measurements even matter? Do we really care about what we're measuring, right? And why do we care about that? We should really think about things that drive the behavior. There's a big company. Yeah.
Classic example, Fred, of you get what you measure is often velocity is that measure that people prize so much, and that can so easily be gamed, right? When teams figure out that's what you're measuring, they're going to just estimate everything higher. So what was a 3-point story is now becomes a 5-point story, and bam, instantly you've increased the velocity, right?
Yeah,
so
that's
you
a good
measure,
point.
but really, what have you done for the customer?
Yeah, velocity is often used as that, oh, that's all we care about. And that's not the success of a Scrum team, right? It's about the business value being delivered. I worked with a client here in the Tampa area, pretty big client. They had me come in for something, and they had a team there that didn't understand how to do relative sizing. We won't go into it here, but they were trying to figure out they didn't understand the benefit of it. So I kind of went through an example of how you properly should relative size something. That's something of interest to you. We have a YouTube video on our YouTube channel. And after I went through it, they said, well, the customer has contracted us that we have to do 41 points of sprint, that we have to do a certain amount of work per estimated work per sprint. And I said, let me guess, you're just adjusting your estimates to meet that number. And they said, yes. So we don't understand the benefit of doing the system. I'm like, there is no benefit. The client has completely nullified the velocity by forcing a set velocity on the team, because the team can just estimate whatever they want to meet that velocity, if that makes sense. So it's an illusion of predictability. Right now you think you're predictable, now you think you know your velocity, and you don't, because it should be something that's owned by the team and shielded and protected by, if you're doing Scrum, a Scrum Master. Another good example of it was back in, you would know the bank if I said it, back in 2008. If you remember back then, a big bank got in trouble because all their account reps were adding fake accounts, fake credit cards, services nobody asked for to their customers, fake customers, and they got caught, they got in big trouble. And when you looked at the why behind it, the executives decided to bonus the account reps based on how many accounts they opened. That was the measurement. Based on the number of accounts you open, we're going to bonus you. And guess what the executives got? They got what they measured, right? You'll always get what you measured. And what did the account reps do? They got the measurement. Any means they could do it. Fake accounts, fake services. So that's when we always say you get what you measure things that really matter. Sure, opening accounts helps drive the business, but we should be measuring its customer satisfaction, right? We should be measuring things that really matter, right? Do we have a working product? Are our customers satisfied? Right? Are we delivering business value? Right? And how do we want to determine that? Sorry, back to you.
Yeah, so measure the right things, and then once you've identified those, measure them right.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah. Along with this, there's kind of like the 12 rules of measurement. Came out of Management 3.0. I don't know if you have this but if not, I can share mine.
I think I have it right here.
All right, so these are just 12 rules to keep in mind, right? Management 3.0, it's a great book. You can get off Amazon, kind of goes through a lot of these things, but always keep in mind, you're going to be biased towards the data, and you're going to get what you measure. If you can remember those two things out of anything from this webinar, that's probably the most important thing. You get what you measure, you will be biased towards that measurement. So measure what really matters. Any of these that stand out to you that are worth pointing out?
Well, one that sticks out to me is that roots end, visualize and humanize. So whatever you're measuring, don't just measure it and keep it to yourself, communicate that out, and then the rationale for it, right? If you don't get buy-in to your metrics, then they're useless.
Yeah, I like to humanize. You can't divulge everyone you can't bring everyone down to just a number on a piece of paper.
Well put, exactly, yeah. All right, that's basically what we had in mind. So let's see if we have any questions in the time remaining.
Number 6 is one that I was like, set imprecise targets. Like you're not gonna hit that number, right? So it's like get a range, get close to it, right? It doesn't have to be exact on that measurement.
Right. All right, let's see. Do we have any questions? I'm not seeing
Yeah,
anything.
so on the Q&A along the bottom, you can hit Q&A. I think the Q&A tab, right? Ashley is actually here. And you can hit that, and then that allow you to put in a question. How do you do checks and balances regarding detrusting all numbers? Oh, that's interesting.
Checks and balances regarding distrusting all numbers.
Yes. What are your thoughts to that? So if you
I think
trust,
you think about it from the other person's point of view, right? Why are they distrusting the numbers, right? And understand that. That's key, I think, to be able to tackle what's really behind the distrust. Do they not trust them because, and then once you figure that out, you'll be able to address that, I think.
regards to number 5.
Distrust all numbers. Okay.
This goes back to the bias I was talking about. So this goes back to everything you look at is you're going to be biased towards what you're looking at. So try to balance it out with maybe another measurement or get other opinions on what you're measuring. So if I see something and I think, oh, this means they're doing well or they're doing poorly, I want to get another person's opinion on that. Right. So let somebody else kind of look at that data as well. And then B, can I validate that through some other measurement? Right. Maybe it's like, well, I don't think their quality is that great. Well, let's look at defects being released. Maybe they're very low. So then that might not be the actual case. So I'm going to kind of use other data points to kind of validate, but I'm also going to be biased because I can't help it. I'm human. And so try to get another person to help validate or invalidate that.
Yeah, use a bunch of numbers rather than a single data point, right? All right, we got some more questions. Who wrote the book? Oh, sorry, I'm skipping them.
Yeah, I'll get that in the link. It's Management 3.0.
Is it Jürgen Apollo, I think, was one of them?
Yeah,
all right, next.
Yeah, you're right on the I can't ever Apollo is the name that's correct. Yeah, Mike Cohen. I'm gonna put a link to the book in the chat here.
Okay, let's see, what else have we got? In your professional opinion, what would be the most ideal story / epic lead time? Ideal, as low as possible. So that way you don't have a whole lot of time that's passed between, when the story or epic was created versus now, so that things don't change too much. Because if you write an epic and then leave it for a month, things may have changed during that month.
Yeah, and keep in mind, like, this is the issue with some of the tooling out there. Like, a lot of people use Jira, and it's not my preferred tool. One of the things that Jira does, which is to this question, is epics are more like categories, and they're open forever. And so you put something in an epic, oh, it's the reporting epic, it's this epic, and that's not really what an epic is intended to be. An epic is intended to be something you open and then close at some point. So taking payments online might be an example of an epic. And then you eventually break that down to major credit cards, social media type payments. Eventually you complete the credit cards, you complete the social media payments with that, which then completes that epic of take customer payments online. So that epic ultimately should be closed. Now, how long should it be open? How long should it be closed? Like Om said, as short as possible, but it might be that I remove the epic, right? Take payments online. I might break it down to 2 smaller epics, and then I just get rid of the first one. And so that might be if I just delete it. Or it also depends where I'm reporting. If I'm reporting at a portfolio level, they might not care about whether it's credit card payments or PayPal payments. They just want to know, can we take payments? And so that'd be a very short epic in that the minute we can take one payment, that's complete. Or they might care more about the mid-level credit cards versus social media payments, but they probably are not going to care about the lower level, right? Take credit card payments might break down to Visa, MasterCard, Discover, American Express. And so the teams care about that, but at the higher level, I only care about whether this epic is complete or not at a percentage wise, right? So now we can take Visa, MasterCard, American Express. We're 50% complete with that epic. So it should be as short as possible, but it should come to a close. It should not be an open-ended forever type of thing. If that makes sense. Yeah, that book is pretty good. Management 3.0 has got a lot of stuff in there. So definitely worth taking a look at that book as well. We got
Oh,
another-
yes, Mr. Good idea to go to the different Scrum teams, Scrum Master to share. You can definitely seek another opinion, but you're going to get their biased opinion in that case as well, because you know your team best. So I'd say, feel empowered and run with the data that you've got.
Yeah, and I would definitely go. Yeah, I would go to another Scrum Master. Hey, what are your thoughts on this, and see if it lines up to what I'm thinking, possibly, right? And get their opinion on it. There's another question in the Q&A window there. How do you balance humanizing your team with meeting stakeholder requirements? Focus on your example, the client setting the velocity. In this example, how would you balance humanizing the team while delivering on story points that aren't really predictably sized? This is an example. What would you measure to ensure the best support team? I'm thinking how to, might be a question more verbally, easier verbally. So verbalize. So in this,
I don't know if the client should be necessarily concerned about your velocity. They should be concerned about what value they're getting.
yeah, so when we do consultant work, I sometimes show velocity and other times I don't. It depends if the client is mature enough to really use it or understand it. So if I have a client that's like velocity, 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 we'll stop doing velocity. All right, we'll stop showing velocity. It's like, it's not intended for you to bash the team. It's intended to be used for predictability. And so we kind of remove that from the metric for the stakeholders and we keep it for the team. Stakeholders I then look at based on the data, here's how long until we can deliver. And that's really what we should be focused on. Like if we can't deliver in time, we might need to spin up another team. We might need to cut some scope out. That's the conversation we should be having, not the velocity piece of it, right? Or it might be that, again, I'm only using it for internal measurement. I'm not going to use it for them. Some clients I do show the velocity and they understand it's just a data point, right? And that's really all velocity is. It's just a one data point among many, right? There's lots of reasons for it. If stuff is super complex, the product owner's not clarifying requirements, that's going to slow us down. We don't have the right skill sets on the team, that's going to slow us down. So velocity is just a point of data for you to then figure out what can I do to help improve velocity, or what are the areas I can focus on itself. Do we need to spin up another team? Do we need to clarify requirements better? Do we need to cut out some scope to hit that date? And so I try not to have that velocity conversation with stakeholders. Right? I only unless they really truly have the understanding for it. I don't know that answer. I'm hoping that answers the question somewhat. All right.
Those are all the questions. And
That's
I know
it.
we're over time as well.
Yeah, we'll have a link for, I think Ashley will put in a link, or there's a link to this, what Om showed on the screen, both pages on our website. And you can
Send it out after.
Yeah, we'll send that out afterwards, or maybe it goes in the chat. But follow-up email. Thanks, Ashley. So that'll go open a follow-up email. You can download that sheet and at least go through the elements that you can look into measuring and see if it's something that's of value to you, right? Work with your Scrum team, say, what can we measure? What's useful? But always keep that in mind. Will it drive the behavior you want? The behavior you want, right? And you're going to be biased towards that. So we have templates of the measurements. We do have, we do have a, actually we can add to that cumulative flow diagram. We have a couple that you can look at. The release. So things that we have that we can send out, Ashley, is the release burn down chart. So we have that. The cumulative flow diagram example, we have that. We'll send that a couple with the follow-up email. I'll make sure I get those to Ashley. That way you can at least take a look at those. And that's it.
Awesome. Thank you all for joining.
You get
Hopefully
one.
you learned something today.
Yeah, you get one Scrum education unit from this, and also you get a PDU if you're on one of the Agile certification tracks. Adam, nice to see your face there, or name, and a couple of others that look familiar.
Hi, Adam. Nice to see you guys.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.